Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel, Peter Likes Books. And yes, I'm back for another driving book vlog, of which I will be exclusively talking about The Devil's Knot this week. I'm going to give some of my thoughts before the book club for tomorrow, because I have so many thoughts, and if you watch my regular vlog, you know I have been talking nonstop. So, if you're watching this on Saturday, on Sunday at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Mel and I will be hosting a true crime book club on my YouNow, which is linked below. You can come over and guest. If you want to guest, you just raise your hand in the stream and then we pick you. And we ask that if you're going to be guested, that you've actually read the book or the majority of the book. And so yeah, so we are talking tomorrow about the Robin Hood Hills murders that happened in 1993 and the West Memphis Three that were convicted of the crimes, of the killing. And I just went to Starbucks to get my coffee, and I just did a review of this little drink right here. So go check out my review channel. And I'm driving over to Dunkin' Donuts to do a review for tomorrow. So I'm kind of pre-filming videos today as well. So anyway, let me just tell you, okay, I went into this, and I have to tell you, I was the one, Mel and I kind of go back when we pick books, and we like throw things out and whatever, and January was, well, February, was February book or, okay, this is our January book. January was kind of tough because Mel threw like 3 ideas at me, and then we couldn't find one, and we couldn't find another, and so I was like, well, why don't we just do, so she picked the February one, Hell on the Heartland. She found that, and then I was like, yeah, this looks like a really good book. We usually kind of like pick topics together and just kind of throw ideas back and forth. That's actually one of my favorite things that we do every month. I love that. So anyway, so I said, well, you know, a lot of people have asked for us to talk about the West Memphis Three, so why don't we read this book, Devil's Knot? And she was like, okay. So she didn't know a whole lot about it. So I know she read the book, and she read the first she watched the first Paradise Lost documentary. There's 3 documentaries. Now, I know that Mel and a lot of other people had a hard time with the narrator of the book. I did not have a hard time with the narrator of the book, but I will tell you that I listen to my books rather fast. I listen to them usually between like 2 and 3 times speed. So I think that has a lot to do with why the narrator never bothers me on books. I'm starting to think that has something to do with it. I actually had to speed this book up more because I could actually hear like the spaces between the sentences, and it was kind of driving me a little crazy. So like I could hear that like she read a sentence and then stop, read a sentence, and so I was like, oh, this is too slow for me, I have to go faster. So anyway, that was my only criticism of the narration. I didn't have a problem with that. Okay, I have read The Devil's Knot, which is the book about the whole case. I watched the movie, The Devil's Knot, with Reese Witherspoon, which if you haven't watched it, it is fantastic. Colin Firth plays this Laz investigator that worked for the defense team that isn't really ever discussed in like the Paradise Lost documentaries, which are kind of like, when you talk about this case, the Paradise Lost documentaries by HBO, there's 3 of them. The first one is just Paradise Lost. I think it's called Robin Hood Hills. The second one is called Revelations, and I think the third one is called Purgatory, but I could be wrong. Anyway, they're kind of like known as the go-to documentaries for anything to do with this case. I had watched them when they first came out. I guess they came out in 1996, and I remember watching them as soon as they came out, and they kind of came out like, well, the first one came out in 1996, and I remember watching that, and then I think I watched the second and the third one all together, like 1, 2, and 3. I rewatched them again years later when they came out. The second one is like 5 years later and what's happening since the case, and then the last one is about them getting out of prison on an offered plea. I've watched all 3 documentaries. I've watched tons of interviews on YouTube, and now I am listening to, so yesterday I finished The Devil's Knot book. It's really long. It was almost 16 hours long on Audible. and I started the Damien Echols book, which he's like the main guy that was, they kind of called him like the ringleader of the West Memphis Three. And so, I'm reading his book now, which is called Life After Death. And it's really interesting. Well, first of all, he reads it himself. And so he kind of sounds the same as he did. He's a very good writer. He sounds very similar to when you hear him like in the Paradise Lost documentaries, like, you know, 30 years ago or whatever. But he, it goes in and it talks a lot about his childhood. And it's really interesting kind of to hear, it's so hot in this car, to hear the whole background of how he ended up where he did in his family. And there's just a lot of like chaos and he self-defined poverty that he talks about. And that kind of leading to him feeling different always from other people, which is interesting because that being different is what ultimately put him in the position that he was in, which I was thinking a lot about this last night. I was like, and I want to say some of this in case I forget to say it in the live stream. You know, this whole thing about Damien Echols is very interesting when you think about it, that we talk about religious freedom in the United States, and literally the thing that really, like, hurt Damien Echols the most was his search for religious freedom. You know, he talks about, oh Lord, people are honking at each other. He talks about, this cold foam is so good. He talks about that when he was growing up, he went to a Catholic school and that they studied this, I think Saint Damien or Father Damien or something. I think it's Father Damien, it's not a saint. There's no Saint Damien, is there? Who helped the lepers. And so he changed his name to Damien because of that. And then later he was interested in the Wiccan religion, which I've known quite a few friends of mine in my life that, I mean, were not just like, oh, I'm Wiccan, like they didn't just like throw it out there, but they truly were Wiccan and really believed in like, you know, like Mother Earth. And I mean, I don't really know that much about the Wiccan religion, but the total difference between like the way that they portrayed it in these documentaries and the way that they basically did a witch hunt on them, you know, and that there's nothing satanic about Wiccan religion. And then when he goes to prison, I think he becomes Buddhist at some point, or he's talking a lot about Buddhism, this guy that comes in there and talks to him. So it's interesting that a lot of Damien Echols' life is centered around this kind of search for a religious ideology, and yet that is what is held against him, and you know, as a major factor in him being one of these killers. You know, it's interesting, this is what I was going to say. When I started it, I picked the book, but then when I had to actually sit down and be like, I'm going to read this book, I wasn't really that interested in reading it. I was like, I've watched these 3 documentaries before. I don't really want to watch them again. I couldn't even find them at first. Some people said that they were on HBO Max. I watched the first one because Mel found the first one on YouTube. So I watched the first one on YouTube, and then somebody said the other 2 were on HBO Max, and then I ended up renting off of iTunes for I think $3.99, The Devil's Knot. And I have read all the articles, so I completely fell down the rabbit hole. This has not happened with me on a book in a true crime book club for a long time. I completely fell down the rabbit hole. I have read all the articles about John Mark Byers, who is the stepfather of Christopher Byers, that was supposedly implicated in all of this, and people thought that he did it. He died actually last June 22nd in a car accident. He was in his 60s. They never found out anything of whether he did it or not. I also read all about Terry Hobbs, who was Stephen Branch's stepfather. Interestingly enough, like in the book, they don't talk about this in anything else. Christopher Byers' stepfather, John Mark Byers, said that he was his adopted father, but then later it came out, and Christopher's father said that he never gave up his parental rights, which that was interesting. That was in the book, actually. And then Melissa Byers ended up dying, and they still don't know they couldn't rule it out as a homicide, so they still don't know why she died. Then they got into all kinds of legal problems. They like stole a bunch of stuff. They moved and then they stole like $20,000 worth of stuff. And then there was like a lot of drugs around that whole like family. Like she supposedly was on Dilaudid and Xanax when she died, and she was like overtaking her prescription. There just was all this craziness that surrounded it. Pamela Hobbs at some point came out, Stephen Branch's mother. She's the one that is like, it's interesting because she's not really a big part of the documentaries, but she is who Reese Witherspoon plays in the Devil's Knot movie, and she's like a big part of the movie. Like she is the movie. And Reese Witherspoon does a fantastic job playing her, but you can tell watching the movie that Pamela Hobbs has a lot of doubt. And then there was this Christopher Morgan, I think his name was, that was friends with the Hobbs family. This was introduced in the Devil's Knot movie and book. I will say that I thought, like, the book was so heavily laden in, like, testimony and factual evidence, and it just was kind of too much. But at the same time, the movie followed it really well and dramatized what all of that was about in the book. So, because they showed the Christopher Morgan, I think that's his name, who was this guy that knew Stephen Branch and knew Pamela Hobbs and sold ice cream in the neighborhood. And then, like, right after the murders happened, he went to California and he actually gave a false statement confession, just like Jesse Miskelly. But he didn't, like, they didn't. Well, first of all, just let me say, the police corruption, they didn't allow him to testify in the trial, or they did, but it had to be behind closed doors. Okay, they show it in the movie, actually, but the police corruption that occurred in this case is literally beyond, okay? Not sending in blood samples. Where are the blood samples? We don't know. Not following up these leads with, like, the bloody guy in the Bojangles restaurant. Not following up with any of these things. Not finding these sticks in the wood till 6 months later and taking them. Not doing any of this stuff, right? Not following up with possible leads. And then the corruption of the judge is unbelievable to me. Unbelievable to me. I could not, when I was listening to this, you know, on the heels of the Casey Anthony case and listening to the defense attorney talking about, or the prosecutor talking about how the defense attorney, Casey Anthony's attorney, was like always was kind of like not playing fair and all this kind of stuff, to then hear how this judge was, and that, like, when he put I don't want to ruin it for people if they haven't finished the book yet, but, like, putting a gag order on this situation to do with Christopher Morgan, and, you know, the whole idea of, like, you're supposed to be able to, as a defense attorney, offer reasonable doubt, and it's like they weren't even allowed to do that in this case. So, anyway, sad. The whole case is just, it's so sad. And I feel like what the saddest thing about it is, I will say that it was interesting because there were times while, I'd be interested to know if anybody else felt this way. You know, I went into this case thinking to myself, I know they didn't do it because they're out because of DNA evidence. Because DNA evidence actually came out, and they got out after like 18 years. Which was really interesting. They didn't really go in and talk a lot about how they got out, and how much work it was with this, like, these people behind the scenes. But this new attorney, this new judge, granted them, like, he exonerated them, but they had to take an Alford plea. And I believe that an Alford plea, I looked it up several times. Do you ever read something and you still don't understand it? Is where they are still convicted criminals, and they of the crime, but they plead their innocence, but they also say that the evidence could lead people to not having reasonable doubt, if that makes sense. So I think it's basically somebody still takes responsibility for it, and then they also can't come back and sue the county or sue the state for being incarcerated for 18 years. I have a feeling that has a lot to do with it. I don't know. But I do know that there was some huge issue between Jason Baldwin and Damien Echols. I've read that too a couple times. They had a falling out over one of the movies being made. I think it was the Devil's Knot movie. And Damien Echols didn't want any part in it. And Jason actually helped and became a producer on it. I don't know if that was the Paradise Lost movies or if that was whatever, but he became like a producer on the movie. And that caused a falling out between he and Damien, but Damien always said that he was really grateful for Jason, because if it wasn't for Jason taking the plea, then like if he was still hoping on his appeals and he didn't take the plea, that like none of them would have gotten out, I think is how it worked, or something like that. I could be wrong about that. But so interesting. I mean, there's so many facets to this case. You know, at some point, Mark Byers, Christopher Byers' stepfather or father or whatever, changed his story, adopted father, whatever he is, and he said, after the Paradise Lost documentaries came out, and he said that he apologized to Damien Echols and Jason and Jesse Miskelly and said that he knew that they didn't do it and that it was embarrassing for him to have to admit that, but he knew that. And it was like this really powerful scene. This is in the third Paradise Lost documentary. He reads a letter from Damien, and Damien wrote Mark Byers and said, you know, like, I know that must have been hard for you, and, you know, we have both been, you know, unfairly accused of a crime, and that he was, like, thinking of him. It was interesting. It was kind of like, after, like, that for me, after everything that happened, that for me was kind of like this. I mean, forgiveness is a really powerful thing. You know what I mean? You want to talk about a changed person. I mean, forgiveness is a really, really powerful thing when you can get in that scene. There was a part in, I think it's the second documentary, when Pam Hobbs, Stephen Branch's mother, she's talking with her dad, and her dad is just, it's such a profound moment in the movie, that her dad starts crying, and because she's like, I can never forgive them, or something like that. And her dad says, but you have to. She's like, can you forgive them? And he said, yes, because I want to see Stevie again. I want to see my mother. I want to go to heaven, and I believe I will, but I have to forgive them to be able to go to heaven. It was like this really powerful moment in the movie. But anyway, I have so much more to say about it. Oh my Lord, I could just go on and on and on and on. I could speculate about who I think did it. Oh, this is what I was going to say. It was interesting, though, at times, listening or taking all of this in, there would be something every once in a while where I would be like, well, maybe they did do it. Like, you know what I mean? I wonder if anybody else, like, out there watching this or reading this stuff had that feeling, like, well, maybe could they have done it? I don't know, you know? It was interesting that I had that thought from time to time. The other thing was that I wanted to say, as far as like the police corruption and stuff, that was so interesting to me, was like this Jesse Miskelly confession was so botched and crazy. And then, okay, like that they sat there and like fed him the Times, which in the documentaries, they don't share all that, right? Like in the book, The Devil's Knot, they share that, but in the documentaries, they don't. They share all the, like, they basically feed him the Times, feed him what they were tied up with, on and on and on. I will say, it was too much to look at some of the stuff in the documentary. It's a just really sad, graphic case, you know? But then the whole situation with the other, what was his name? I can't think of his name now. It starts with an A, I feel like. And Vicky Hutchinson, the woman that she, like, in the movie The Devil's Knot, if you've seen it, it's so funny because she dresses up and like makes her house like all witchy poo and has black candles and heavy metal music, and she wants Jesse to introduce her to Damien and Jason, and they come over. But then later in the book, basically in the movie, it's interesting how like in the movie they show it one way different than the book. In the movie, I mean, they basically came out and said this in the book, but in the movie they really showed it. Aaron was the kid's name, who now says he has no memory of any of it whatsoever, which that's interesting, right? So she does this. So in the movie, they show her talking to the police after she got arrested for these like bad checks. This is what the investigator finds out. Then she says she goes to this, like, it's called like an SPAT or whatever, like this witch gathering in the woods, and she's scared to death. But in the movie, okay, like in the book, they say that she went there and she drank all this whiskey and then she was passed out on her front lawn the next day. I'm like, where's your son while this is all happening? But anyway, the son that she is told to tell all these stories, which is basically what, you know, the reality is. And then in the movie, they show her on her patio watching a movie of an SPAT. So it's like, it leads you to think that she made up this whole thing based on movies, and that it just is ridiculous. And then in the book, did anybody else catch this? This is at the end of the book, when she says, I could not believe this, when she said, what was it? He said something to her, the investigator, because then she starts calling the investigator because she can't trust the police, she says. So she calls she talks to the investigator several times, and his, like, assistant, and who's actually the one that cut Damien's hair before the trial. Which, like, that was part of the book that I think it was funny, because in one of the Paradise Lost things, he says, yeah, she, like, cut my hair right before we went out there with these plastic scissors or something. But anyway, so Vicky Hutchinson said that Damien Eccles picked her up at her house in a red Ford Escort. The total references to all these cars, Ford Escorts and stuff like that, so totally took me back to the early 1990s to my friends that had Ford Escorts. But anyway, and Ford Festivas, do you remember those? But anyway, then he said to her, the investigator said, Damien never had he didn't have a driver's license, and he never had nobody in his family or none of his family or friends had a red Ford Escort. She goes, maybe I dreamed the whole thing. Girl, what? These are people's lives on the line. Like, it's just unreal to me. So anyway, I think that I could just go on it for hours and hours and hours about this. I have so much to say. I cannot wait till the live stream tomorrow. I'm super excited. So anyway, I'm gonna get off here now. Come join us tomorrow, 4 p.m. I know this is kind of a different video. This is me venting about all of my thoughts about this case, but I don't really know who I think did it in the end. I have to tell you, my gut kind of tells me, allegedly, I'm gonna say, based on the evidence that I've read, Terry Hobbs and his friend, because they found hair fibers on stuff at the site years later, and basically the whole Devil's Knot movie says that he did it. By the way, can we just talk about the guy that played John Mark Byers in the movie Devil's Knot? Deserved an Academy Award because he played Mark Byers so well. Anyway, all right, I'm gonna get off here now, and come over tomorrow and join Mel and I. We'll be excited to have you, and yeah, and if you want to just come and hang out, you don't have to guest. I mean, you can just, usually only 5 or 6 people guest anyway, but if you want to just come and hang out and you haven't read the book, feel free to come over and just hang out and listen with us. We always have a good time, and we laugh and talk about all kinds of stuff. So 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time on the link down below, and I also put it up on my Twitter. So all right, I love you guys, and I will see you in my next video. Bye.